this isn't something they teach you at school. Like, I go to writing school, and they don't even teach you this. The hard thing is, to be published, you know, you don't necessarily need to be writing in what is nowadays called good craft. I do think it's interesting, you know, the argument of, do you think, you know, young writers or new writers are just more occupied with wanting to get published rather than really sitting tight and honing their craft?
What advice would you give to emerging writers that are trying to build their confidence, where they feel like they're not improving? Okay, so this was originally going to be just like a regular chit-chatty video. I sit in front of my camera, I talk about my thoughts on what it means to be a good writer, but I realized how personal and subjective of a question that is. I think that this conversation would be much better served by being more of like a dialogue with other writers. So this video is going to be the first video in at least a 2-part series. For this video, I had the absolute honor of having Rachel discuss this topic with me. I felt like she was the perfect person to talk to about this. I wanted to make this more than one video because I think it warrants more than one video. So this video is going to be my conversation with Rachel. Keep an eye out for a future video or for multiple future videos where I can hopefully talk to other writers in my circle. So yeah, I hope the conversation is interesting. I had the most amazing time talking to Rachel. I hope the conversation can be interesting or helpful for any of you guys. That's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm just gonna have you introduce yourself.
Yeah, totally. Hi everyone. So I'm Rachel. I run the authortube channel Rachel Writes, where I make videos about my writing journey and my publishing journey, and pretty chill over there. So it's just, my channel's called Rachel Writes if you wanted to check it out. Yeah, I also make some craft videos too.
Everyone knows, but I've been watching Rachel's channel for like a million years, I feel like. So it's a very cool to like have you on my channel and to have you on this video. I feel like this is something that means a lot of different things to different writers. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to chat about, you know, your perspective on things, because I feel like, you know, as someone who sort of had a very different writing background from me, and a lot of other writers were mostly like self-taught, or we just kind of like navigate this journey by ourselves. But you are someone who's gone through a more like formal writing background than a lot of writers do. So when you decided to, I guess, study creative writing, was that something that you always knew that you wanted to do?
No, actually, no.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So my story of like, you know, how I decided I want to be a writer isn't exactly like, I think I hear a lot of writers say like, I was really interested in writing since, you know, I was, you know, maybe like 3, 4, 5 or 6, even like super young ages. And my journey with writing was a little bit different. I was 12 when I decided I wanted to be a writer. And, you know, I've been seriously writing since that age. Like I started writing like books at that age. But the decision to study writing came because I think it was like the thing that I was the best at, that I knew it was a passion, but it wasn't something that I thought of immediately. I always thought I would study English. And then I took some English classes and I realized I didn't really like English. I liked math more than I liked English. And so it, you know, my plans were a bit squashed at that point, and I think the next best thing was writing. And I'm really lucky that I can study writing. It's not, you know, a very like practical thing to study. So I feel very grateful that I'm here and I can study. But that's basically how I got to study creative writing.
Yeah, 12 is still really young.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I wasn't a child, but I was very young when I decided so, you know, I'm happy about that in a lot of ways, because it, you know, sort of has taught me to, at least in the beginning, I didn't really have a good sense of what was great or what wasn't, because I was 12, so it was totally fine.
And you don't need to.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know you already answered this question, how long have you been writing? But my next question is, what point in your writing journey did you first think to yourself, like, I think I'm good.
Yeah, I was thinking about this question, and I think that there were several stages of like me thinking, I really like that, or I think I'm a good writer. So a couple of them that I noted down was the first time I think I was rereading the second book in the series that I've been writing for a very long time. At the time, I was 13 or maybe 14, and I was just rereading the manuscript over Christmas break, like to entertain myself. I was like, for funsies. And I remember thinking, and actually I said to my sister, who's also a writer, I was like, wow, this reads like a published book, which is bold of me to say, because it really didn't, like looking back on it now. But, I had so much confidence about it. I really did think that. So that was one moment. But, I seriously started feeling very secure in my writing about 6 years in. So that was when I entered my first year of university. Of course, I was starting as a writing major. And that was, I think, when I really felt secure in my style. And, it wasn't perfect. Of course, it's still wavy. There are ups and downs, bumps in the road. I have videos from when I was, that age, like documenting the ups and the downs. But it was when I felt like, okay, I can see consistency. I can see sort of where I gravitate. And, this is the moment where I feel like I can call myself a good writer. But it's funny, like every single year, I find myself calling myself a good writer in like a different context, even more and more every year. Yeah. Like it changes. I'm like, I'm a good writer this year, but like in a different way than it was last year. So it's kind of cool, like to see, what I pick up on as being good throughout the years.
How do you define what it means to be a good writer? And I guess you said like it kind of changes, but is there, I guess, like a solid way that you still define it? And like my slightly related question is also how much of that kind of comes from internal reasons versus external validation?
I would say that 99% of how I define a good writer is how, I feel about my work, for example. So if I'm trying to determine whether or not my work is good, if I am a good writer, like that opinion is mostly on me. Like I want to be the number one person to first enjoy my work, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of like, and that brings in the second part of the question, like if we're talking about external validation or publication or talking to other writers and they're giving you compliments, I love all of those things. I think a lot of writers, if not most writers, love external validation. But something that I've learned is that it's so helpful in the process, external validation, but it's not necessarily the be all end all, and it's not necessarily like sustainable for viewing yourself as a good writer. I think a writer's opinion of their own work is something that is so valuable to work on and to really like build a relationship with. Because I want to be the number one fan of my work, and it's not going to be like a consistent thing. Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, this sucks. Like I hate my writing today.
It's not a good day.
But most of the time, I want to be like the person that's going to champion my work the most. And I think it's important because it builds up a sort of confidence in a writer to where when things won't go your way, they're not going to go well, that in many ways you're going to be able to come back from that. You're going to be able to get up and continue writing regardless. So I think looking only for praise with your work could lead to burnout. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it could lead to some sort of burnout in your work, maybe not feeling like you know where to go beyond what people say about your writing.
I feel like this is something that more writers need to hear. And by more writers, I mean me. but also more writers. Like specifically the part that you said about like at the end of the day, you should be the one that you're trying to impress, Right. I've always been an externally motivated person. And that is the same with my writing. I'm very externally motivated. I care a lot about what other writers think about my work. And I think that's fueled by having an older brother who also writes, and he's a very good writer. He's like a talented writer. Not a lot of writers are talented. A lot of people become good because they work really hard. But I think my brother was one of those people, or is one of those people, that's like, it came naturally to him. And when you have a presence like that in your life that you're constantly trying to impress, you start creating this like phantom audience.
Right.
And, you know, when I was in workshop, I was also trying to impress people, like other writers there. And I'm trying to unlearn that, because I don't think that it's helped me necessarily.
I don't even think that it's anybody's fault that writers do this or feel this way for so long, because I think it's something that's kind of ingrained in a lot of us, especially it's like, you gotta publish your work. And I love publishing. I publish my writing all the time. But the thing is, you know, because there's such a pressure to publish your work and to put it out there and to get an audience and to build a platform and all of these things that just get very overwhelming, I think it can be hard for writers initially to be like, it's fine if I'm just exploring this for myself right now and I want to publish one day, but, you know, let me find myself first as a writer. And, you know, something that's important to me is like, I have learned to accept that sometimes I'm an awful writer, like objectively, like, I mean, I don't believe really that writing can be viewed objectively, but objectively, in my opinion, some of my writing is not good. Like, it's bad. It just shouldn't see the light of day. But then I also have to accept that at other moments, I'm an excellent writer, and that's fine. It's totally good for those things to coexist, and that's so normal.
I think it's funny because I have these moments where I wrote something really good, but then the next day when I write something really bad, I'm like, oh, I'm a bad writer. Like, I'm just straight up a bad writer. But I think it's a good point that there are these ebbs and flows, and I don't think any one moment or one project or one like hiccup in the road, I guess, define that. Because I think when we think of like what it means to be a good writer, we think it's like, oh, once you're at a point where everything you write is like consistently good. And I don't think that's necessarily true either.
No, I think it was one of your videos that I was watching recently where I think you might have said something along the lines of like, you don't necessarily see yourself progress as a writer. Like you can't see that overnight, for example. And in general, I think it is just difficult to see yourself progress because it is not a visual medium, for example. It's not, you know, even with YouTube, you can see yourself progress, like if you watch your old videos. But with writing, it's a little bit hard. So, you know, I think learning to love your work is probably the hardest thing you'll do as a writer. It's just hard. It's not easy at all. And it's not a consistent process either. And progressing as a writer, getting good at writing is not a linear process. And that's a good thing. But just because it's non-linear doesn't mean it doesn't amount to improvement overall. You know, it's like a big picture kind of thing.
Yeah. My next question is like, do you think that publishing affects what or how you write in terms of like the ideas that you brainstorm or how you approach a story? Or does publishing often really come second to just like, let me just write what I'm feeling and what I'm really motivated to write right now?
I think this is a really great question. When I sit down to write, when I write, I don't think about publishing, but you know, it's pretty easy. Like, when you're in the middle of like a writing session, start thinking about it. Like when I'm in the middle of writing a short story, I'm like, which magazine would I submit to? Like, what would the editor think? You know, it's very easy. It's kind of like just an unconscious voice that, you know, occurs. And but for me personally, when I do sit down, like publishing is never really on my mind. Mostly, you know, mostly I'm talking about with my short fiction and my poetry. I'm just kind of writing, and I know, I don't know if this sounds like overly confident to say, but I know that it will get picked up somewhere. I'm not sure where, but I just know, like, if I'm writing something that I'm proud of, I'm not thinking about the venue that, like, you know, I want to tailor it to the venue, but I know that there's going to be a venue somewhere, sometime, even that's a long time from now. I've only really recently started working on novels for publication again. I took, like, quite a long break from writing novels for publication, maybe about 4 years or so. And so it's been interesting to think about it because with the novels, I can't help but think about the publication, because writing a novel is so scary. So I totally get why people do it, because I'm doing it all the time. Like, I think it's so normal, but it's hard to like unlearn it or like turn it off for a second, you know? Yeah.
There's a point where you do get a level of confidence that your writing has, like, it has value, you know? You're at a point where it's like, I know my style, I know my voice, I know what I'm capable of. And if it doesn't get picked up by one magazine or another, that doesn't have anything to do with the quality of the story. I think it takes sometimes a lot of time for a writer to get to that point, because I feel like I'm only there now after 10 plus years of writing. It's because before I used to be like, clearly if this story doesn't like is going to get rejected somewhere, then it's objectively bad. But it's only after I kind of have learned a lot more about specifically like the magazine publishing process and like how many factors go into a story actually getting selected. There's like a million factors, and then it's like, how good is the story?
Literally. That's such a great way to put it.
So I feel like if that was something I had an understanding of sooner, it would have definitely it would have saved me a lot of trouble. And it's interesting because this isn't something they teach you at school. Like, I go to writing school and they don't even teach you this stuff. Like, they're not telling you you know, the importance of learning to love your writing, or you know, that it's going to be a wobbly experience, and that's okay. And even now, you know, like I said before, it can waver, but at the end of the day, it's something that, you know, I try to encourage on my channel, for example, because it isn't something that is talked about, you know, a lot, even though I think it's something that every writer goes through. I agree. It's not something I heard in my workshops either, and I wish I knew it sooner. But I honestly, I think it's interesting to hear that you don't really like tailor submissions to publications, because I think that's something that a lot of new writers wonder. It's like, oh, is this going to fit a publication? Like, oh, what do they publish? Like, let me try to write something similar to what they publish and stuff like that. But does that take out some of the fun of just writing to write,
I mean,
you know?
Okay, so my tips as somebody who works behind the scenes on several magazines is, I think it's great to read the magazines before, if you can get your hands on a copy, or if there's you know sometimes they post like pictures if it's a physical like print version. Sometimes the contributors will post pictures on their Twitter or Instagram or whatever, so those are great places to find excerpts, and online magazines exist too. So it's always great to be familiar with the vibe, the tone, and everything, but I don't recommend writing specifically, like if that's not gonna bring you joy, if that's your thing, like if that's a great prompt, go for it. But I mean, as somebody who, you know, volunteers on magazines and reads the slush piles of several different places that look for different types of things, it's so subjective, because I'm one reader, and then you might get a different reader, for example, depending on how big the editorial board is. And then, you know, if I'm a reader and not an editor, maybe the editor doesn't even like it. You know, or maybe the editor loves it, you know? So, like, it's so dependent. And I think if you have a piece of work, you're confident in it, and you think it might fit the tone or something, that is enough. You don't necessarily need to, like, write for the magazine.
My next question is, and this is just... it was a question that was spun out of Twitter discourse and mediocre books getting published, or books getting published prematurely, or there's always a mad rush for like young, like, you know, there are writers who are 21 and feel like they're behind because they haven't gotten a book deal yet. And so the counter discourse I saw to that was the idea of, you know, is craft dead? Are people more concerned with, I want to get published versus I want to hone my craft? And so I want to, like, you know, I want to ask you your opinion. Do you agree on the critique that craft is dead? And do you agree or disagree that, you know, there are many young writers, and by young, maybe it's not even just age, but just people who are starting, you know, that are putting more value on publishing versus actually honing their skills.
I think this is a really interesting debate to have. For me, I think craft is a really subjective term, which means that I don't think it can necessarily be dead, because craft is going to mean something different to different people that live in different regions, that write in different periods of time. What is excellent craft in literary fiction in 2022 today might not have been excellent craft 500 years ago in the same genre. And what's excellent craft in genre fiction, let's say fantasy today, might not be the same for different genres. It really depends. So I think it might be a bit of a broad statement to say that craft is dead, but I do think it's interesting, the argument of, do you think, young writers or new writers are just more occupied with wanting to get published rather than really sitting tight and honing their craft? I think with writing is such a vocation that requires patience. The hard thing is, to be published, you don't necessarily need to be writing in what is nowadays called good craft. Definitely different types of books that are published for different reasons, and the merit is calculated in a different way. So some books will be awarded based off of their, craft excellence, whereas some books go viral on TikTok. And some of the books that are viral on TikTok are excellent in terms of their craft. And, it's very subjective when it comes to how we define these things, and different readers like different things. So I do think I have seen a lot of younger or newer writers wanting to be published very soon after they start their process. And I don't blame that, and I don't on the writer, and I don't think that that's a bad thing, because I was there too. For example, I started writing when I was 12. I wanted to be published immediately. I was like, publish me tomorrow. I for a long time was trying to publish one of, I think it was maybe my 4th or 5th manuscript on this young adult contemporary novel. I was really going hard on the publication for that. I had entered several pitch contests. I had gotten it into a mentorship. I was very close to querying it, and I wanted it to be published. And when it didn't work out, it was kind of like, well, that sucks, right? It's not fun, but it was a very important part of my life, getting that book published. And it can be disappointing when you realize, maybe I don't want to publish this anymore, or maybe this isn't publishable according to what the industry says, right? So I can see why, and I relate to people who want to be published immediately. I think there is something to say, though, about spending some time getting to know your work. I'm grateful that I didn't publish any of the books that I wrote when I was younger. I'm glad that I didn't publish them, because I got, more time to work on my craft. And the works that I do publish now are things that I'm happy, are out there, right?
Yeah. I think the place of, I don't want to say anger, but the sort of judgment that comes out of this discourse, if you want to call it, I think on the reader side, it has to do with the fact that people are maybe reading the same tropes over and over, or a reader will crack open a book and be like, what is this prose, how did this get published? And then on a writer side, it's a little bit of that too, cracking open a book and being like, I could have written this, what? Or I can write better than this, I think it also is magnified as a writer, because we want that publishing success as well. And so when we see that success being given to a piece of work that we deem personally as kind of subpar, or it's for either our own reasons, or it's just we don't think it's that well written, but it here it is on it's on the bestseller list and stuff. There's a certain envy and anger that comes out of that. And I think that's what fuels some people to just really have a lot of hostility towards certain books that they deem are mediocre but very successful. Right. And it's hard, because on one hand, it's I get it. I get where all of that anger comes from. But at the end of the day, it's not really the author of that subpar book that I have any negative feelings towards. It's traditional publishing as a system, first of all. And it's also the fact that, I haven't gotten my stories to a place where I'm happy with. And so it's a very like internal thing as well. Like the anger is almost internal, but it manifests in being like, why did this book get published?
Especially like a year or two ago, I really had a very set idea of what was a good book.
Yes.
And I refused to read anything else because I was like, no. That is not good. No. And I think, I don't know what happened. I just think I've shifted the ideology quite a lot. You know, I don't know. Some people might have critiques about, oh, well, like craft is being like exploited or disrupted or something. And I think all these conversations are really interesting to listen to. I also think it's interesting that now, like, books, you know, aren't necessarily defined solely on how, you know, the sentences are constructed, for example, or you know, there's something else about it where the merit exists, and it's not necessarily because of the craft alone. I think that's interesting. I think it boggles people's minds, especially in the age of writing advice, where you know, tons of writing advice books, writing advice blogs. I make writing advice on my YouTube, and we're constantly being told what makes good writing. And when we see something that, you know, disrupts the canon, we're like, what? And it's so successful, it doesn't make sense. Because that's not what they're teaching us in the books. That's not what I'm teaching on my YouTube channel, for example.
I agree. And I think there's like this element of, I think some people maybe don't have an awareness of their own tastes. And by some people, I mean like me as well. Like I'm trying to unlearn this now, because I used to be, up until very recently, and sometimes still, like very pompous about prose. And I would, right? I would like pick up a book in Indigo, and I would read. I had this like 1 paragraph rule where I would not pick up a book if it was like, oh, the prose is like so subpar, it's just like whatever, you know. And so I used to be a very like prosy prose kind of reader, where I was like, you need to have lines coming out of your first paragraph. And I still really value that in stories, but I don't define a book or a story on those standards like universally anymore.
I completely agree. I think we had the exact same journey. I would only read stories or books of a very certain style, and if it wasn't that style, it wasn't good. I don't know. Which is, I don't know. Like, I think what changed my mind is I had read a short story collection that wasn't written in the typical style that I read. That short story collection was How to Pronounce Knife by Suvankam Tamavangsa.
Yeah.
And it was a bit more, it wasn't as like detailed in the way that I am used to. I kind of used to read a lot of flowery writing, for a lack of a better descriptor. And Suvankam's collection wasn't like that. And it blew my mind. It was my favorite thing I had read in a really long time. It allowed me to also see, well, I'm writing a lot of this style of like flowery, more writing that I only want to read. But that was just because I thought that was the only kind of writing that was good. And then I started to kind of realizing that wasn't necessarily all my style had to be. And my style has developed a lot since that point.
And I say this as someone who I do think I have slightly pompous tastes. I do think that like I will watch something that's like, you know, fairly good, or I'll read a book that's probably not bad, and I'll be like, it was all right. But I acknowledge that it's not really on the book. It's like kind of on me and my expectations of the story.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting because, you know, a couple of years ago, I'm not going to name the book, but one of my favorite books ever, had a review on it. And it was basically being like, I can't read this. It is horribly written. It is like this. I can't. This is just terrible. And I always, for years, just couldn't understand why this person would say this. This is my favorite book. I'm like, what are you saying? Like, hilariously, a couple of years later, I'm here now and I'm reading the review again, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that. Whatever. It's just that I have sort of developed my taste and sort of in my reading and what I expect out of writing that it doesn't matter if people have, different opinions to me now.
I think some of it comes with humility. Like, I think the more that I write, the more I realize how difficult writing is.
Oh my God.
The care that gets put into the simplest stories.
Yes. No, I totally get that. I think, so something strange has happened to me over the last month. So I started reading again, and I haven't been reading a lot. And what's funny is I haven't highly disliked any of them. And I thought that was strange because when I was younger, I would read a book and I'd be like, yeah, no, I didn't like this at all. Goodbye, 1 star. And now when I was reading the book, like even if there were flaws or things that I didn't particularly like, I think because I shifted my mindset, it didn't bother me as much if there were things that I didn't like. And I still found things to enjoy, which was kind of nice because I didn't feel like I had taken away nothing from the reading experience, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I think people would expect the opposite of me because I study writing. So you'd think I'd have a very narrow view of, what I believe is right. But I think being a writing major has actually changed my mind a lot about that.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Yeah, it's tough because you spend all this time being like, I'm gonna get better at writing. And then, books these days, especially in the genres that I write in, which is like speculative, fantasy, sci-fi, they're getting marketed based on their tropes and their premises, and it's like the writing comes second to that. And that was something that was really difficult for me to accept, where I think I got very angry for a while. Like I was an angry writer for a long time. And sometimes I still am, but I try not to direct that anger at readers or at specific writers, and more just like, years and years and decades of like how publishing has kind of been shaped, and the fact that it's a business and this is capitalism, which is a much more systemic issue.
We can just call the whole video this is capitalism. Yeah,
and capitalism. Yeah, my last question is, what advice would you give to emerging writers that are trying to build their confidence, or they feel like they're not improving, or by extension, are just kind of like, what am I doing this all for? Am I even getting good at this,
First, for building your confidence, focus on a personal project for a while if you can, or at least a project that you're not thinking like there's a deadline to publish it for, like I need this published by next year, for example.
Yeah.
The reason why I suggest this is because, it's really important to sort of work on a project, at least it was for me, so it might not work for everybody, where that you can just kind of be free and there's not really an audience looming in mind. And even when I write my personal projects, sometimes I still think of that phantom audience, even though it's just me.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I just have to impress myself, really. But if you don't want to dedicate years to a personal project, which is very understandable, not everybody's goals are going to be the same as mine, even dedicating 2 days or a week or a month to a personal project that can be short, like a short story, for example. It's interesting just to see what that does for you, knowing that you're writing without the constraint of publication. I also recommend rereading your work like a reader would. So get some popcorn, get some tea, snuggle up in bed with your squishmallows, get your cat or your dog and like pet them or whatever. Take some time to enjoy the work, really.
That's
like,
good advice.
You wrote it because you liked something about it, you know? I think just changing the mindset in which I read books, changing the format in which I read my book again. Yeah. Like sometimes I will change the page size, increase the font, send it to like my phone and read it on like the iBooks app or whatever as like a DIY ebook. Okay, I can sit down and enjoy it instead of looking at Word or looking at Scrivener where you can edit it.
PDFs can't touch it.
Happens.
Don't touch that.
So another tip for me is learn to compliment your work and self-compliment yourself when you read something you like.
Do that.
So I think a lot of writers, they just don't want to compliment your work. They're like, I don't, either they feel like it's too like, egoistic to do that. Like it's not like good to, I don't know, compliment yourself. I think that's something we should move away from in society in general, because we're humans, we do great things. We should reward ourselves when we do great things. So if you see a line you like, compliment it. I also like to avoid, speaking badly about my work when I actually don't mean to speak badly about it.
Yeah.
Now, for writers who feel like they're not improving, I had a couple of things. Number one, accept the uncertainty of time. So you're not necessarily going to get better overnight. I know it's so frustrating, but it's hard to accept. But what I found helpful was that I have accepted sort of that I'm just here. I'm just vibing. I'm not going to see the progression. until it's years later. And I know that because I've been writing for a number of years now. When you're in your first year of writing or your first month of writing, your first week of writing, it's probably going to be really hard to see that. So just accepting that is helpful. Number 2, I like to find my old writing and reread it. Now, some people might not like doing this, but especially if it's very old writing, you're going to see changes. You're going to see differences. Some you might like and some you might not like, but the differences mean that you're improving. And then finally, be more consistent with your practice. And I think this is hard, but I mean, it's helpful. So there's an Instagram sound, I think, or it might be TikTok, something like this. If you're losing motivation, stick with consistency, because consistency will bring your motivation back. That is the ideology I take with me through life now.
That's very good.
Nothing has to be perfect, but try to write, whenever you can. A goal that is, I think, pretty attainable for most people to achieve is once a month. It doesn't have to be often. I think people make it seem like you've got to write every day or every week or multiple times a week.
Yeah.
I haven't written in probably a month now. It's fine. I think as long as
it's fine.
I know I'm going to go back to it at one point. As long as you know that.
I agree. Consistency really is key. I've gotten to a point where it's like, oh my God, I would feel so bad for skipping 2 days. And then I come back and I'm like, oh, it's fine. The draft is fine, guys.
Yeah, exactly. And you pick up right where you left off, and it's probably not an issue.
The other thing I want to say about consistency is that I got really, really consistent only over the last 2 years. Even though I've been writing for so long, I would write sporadically. I started pushing myself to write every single day, every single few days. And when I look back on the work from only 2 years ago, like in 2020, it's gotten better. Like, it's gotten way better. And I didn't notice that on a daily basis when I was writing. But when I was like just looking back on it, like a few months ago, I like opened an old draft from 2020 and I was like, oh my God, this sounds like a different person.
Yes.
And I think that just like really reframed things for me, because I mean, I like, as a lot of people already know, I submitted to a magazine for the first time and it was accepted. And I was like, first of all, I was like, this is insane.
That is such a power move. Let's just take a moment. The first submission ever accepted on the first go.
You know what? I think what I realized was that I was capable of writing something magazine ready way earlier than I realized I was. I waited so long because I was being so hard on myself that I wish I had just tried sooner, because it was like my writing was ready. And I think after being consistent for like even a year, even 2 years, I was able to get my writing to a place where it was like ready for other people to read, it's like ready for publication. I was way too hard on myself, basically. Don't be hard on yourself, guys.
Totally, exactly. I think so many writers, I mean, I talk to people that I know in my program who are even feeling that same way, and so many writers, I think, are afraid of rejection. And another thing, rejections really don't matter. I know a lot of people make rejection goals. And rejection this, rejection that. I don't focus on the rejections. I mean, if you like rejection goals and that's helpful for you to keep submitting, that's fine. But as somebody who volunteers, I've volunteered, I think, on like 5 editorial boards at this point.
Yeah.
The rejection doesn't matter. Just ignore it, okay?
Yes.
If you have a moment where you feel like my work is ready, believe that. I know it's so hard for people to believe in their work and, to hold out hope that one day they will be a good writer. But it's going to happen. If you've been practicing, you're going to get better. I promise.
Yeah, you got to be your own fan. This is true.
Yes.
I also think, like, if you're, like, really worried or, you really don't know if something's good, or, like, you think something's good, but you want to, like, be sure before you, like, you want to have that little confidence boost before you submit something, let people read your work. I think a lot of writers are scared of feedback. And once you get to a place where you're comfortable receiving feedback, your writing is going to get so much better.
Absolutely. And the thing about feedback is it's not even the feedback that matters, really. It's about whether or not you know your intention well enough to, like, to accept the feedback. So if you get feedback and you're like, well, it's negative feedback, for example, this must mean something. A lot of writers, when they are initially getting feedback, or, you know, they've never gotten it, they might be thinking, if I get feedback, it means there's something wrong with my work. I need to throw it all away and start out. No, honey, it's okay. You're going to be fine. Take a deep breath when that happens. And your work is most likely okay. You just got to look at the feedback and see if it aligns with what you want for the work. If it does align, then that means that's good. You know how to implement it because you know your vision, for example. And if it doesn't, that's great. You don't have to use it. And so I think it's so important for people to feel like they're comfortable with, to the point where they can, you know, accept or reject feedback, or, you know, still take feedback with grace and, you know, discuss it, but not necessarily use it.
I agree. I think discernment is like a really important key, because writers are very susceptible to being like, okay, what should I change? What should I change? Like, you know, what could make it objectively good? But I do think it is a balance between learning to steel yourself so that you're ready to hear something that's harsh but could make the story better for what you're trying to do with it, versus being like, okay, I see where they're coming from, but that would fundamentally change something about this scene that I don't want to go there, so I think I'm going to discard it. And I've had both of those instances happen. Like, I've gotten tons of feedback where it's like, at the end of the day, I disagree. And then I've also gotten feedback that was like hard for me to accept. But then when I thought about it for a little longer, I was like, damn, okay, I guess I got to implement this feedback. And it was specifically around some, it was for like Sway With Me, which was the short story that is getting published with Augur next year. When I was getting beta reader feedback from my friend, she was basically saying something about exposition. She was like, oh, okay, if that's what you want the reader to know about your world building, you need to make that clearer. And I was, at first I was like, no, you don't understand. It's the nuance. There has to be subtlety. And like, I hint at the world building in these exact lines, in these exact scenes. And she was like, it wasn't clear. And I was like, damn. And so I thought about it, and I was like, okay, that for what I want to do, which is to make this world building clear, I have to accept this feedback about it not being clear. Like, I just have to accept that. I think I was like very defensive at first. Yeah, as soon as I accepted the feedback, it made the story better. Yeah.
I get feedback all the time where I'm like, no,
you don't get it, but you don't get it though.
Exactly. I'm like, no, I had an idea for this, and clearly it was a bad reading. And sometimes that is true. But a lot of the times, you know, you just sit back and you take a breather and you realize, okay, actually, no, I do want this feedback to be implemented, because I do think it'll make my vision better.
Thank you so much to Rachel for joining me on this video. Go follow Rachel if you aren't already.